Nubhya is doing PhD from Carnegie Mellon University, and Rohanvia had just completed MS from CMU as well. And so like they'll introduce themselves as they speak. Now I'll request Mayank and Amya here to start explaining the MS process in brief, and uh, I hope all of you are here, and I think we can get started.
Sure, here. So am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. So Ameya will be joining us shortly. He should be joining. Meanwhile, I'll start by introducing myself. Once Ameya is there, he can also add on to some points that I've made, and perhaps even if he joins a little late, he'll take part in the Q&A session. So, as Udbhav said, I'm Mayank Baranwal. I'm final year student at computer science, and I've gotten currently. So I'd applied for masters, and I've gotten admits at the Carnegie Mellon program and a couple of the universities, ETH and the Wisconsin Madison program. So what I'll do is I'll broadly go over. I'll be talking about the master's part, and because I've applied towards computer science, some of the advice I give may be tailored, or some of the guidelines I give may be tailored more towards what is applicable for computer science. So if you're trying to apply for slightly different field than computer science, just double check once with other seniors who've applied in whatever area, in that specific area. Okay, so I'll get started, and if you have any questions, I guess you can feel free to interrupt me if you want to, or I think there's definitely a Q&A session at the end, so you can also ask them there. Okay, so the first thing to understand with regards to masters, like the first thing that should come to your mind is why. Why do you want to take up a masters, right? So there are multiple reasons. So for some people, it's about access to better job opportunities. For some people, it provides a roadmap to PhD, so they may be a little undecided about where they want to do research in. And for some others, it's just about further exploration in a particular field. They want they want hands-on experience trying to work in a different field. Perhaps they weren't able to explore it as deeply as they wanted to in bachelor's. And so, but primarily, it's for primarily people are interested towards job opportunities, but that's not necessary. Like a lot of people also take it up for trying to get into PhDs. And the most common timeline with regards to applying for masters and for PhD programs is it's typically just after BTech to somewhere around, let's say, maximum 4 or 5 years after BTech. Beyond that point, you'll notice very few people take up masters because the return is less, so to speak. Like if you already have more than 6, 7 years of industry experience, then what you may gain from a master's may not be so significant. Um, in that sense, it may not be so useful, and so most people tend to apply directly after BTech, or um, or typically just or typically after doing a job for 2, 3 years, and if they want to gain some amount of clarity on whether they want to take up masters or MBA. So like one frequent question a lot of students ask is like, when should you apply? Just after BTech or after 2, 3 years? So that decision, it's a very personal decision. It's something that really depends on where you are in terms of what you, or how decided you are in terms of what you want to explore. So like I mentioned, for some people, they take up masters. Like for some people, just after BTech, it's not so clear where exactly they want to go into, or what exactly it is they want to explore. Like you may have a very broad range of interests, and so working in a job for a couple years, 2, 3 years, may actually help you narrow down what exactly it is that interests you, and then accordingly you can take it up. For others, perhaps they're more interested to say towards the PhD program, and they may see masters as a jumping point. So that could be something to look at. Um, okay, moving on towards requirements. So one thing to understand with regards to the requirements or the entire process, and was you'll never find any hard cutoffs with regards to any particular matter, whether it be CPI, whether it be say scores on TOEFL or GRE, which we'll cover a little later. But like understand that your profile essentially is the sum of all the different sum of all the different components. So if you find yourself lacking in a particular area, like don't be demotivated or feel like no, I can't apply. That's not the case. That's not the case. You can always try and cover up for a lack in a certain area with by taking up more in by doing better in a certain other area. So having said that, broadly speaking, right? And they take this with a grain of salt. Like there'll always be exceptions. There'll always be people who've been able to do masters or PhD without satisfying every single one of these requirements. It's recommended to have, say, a CPI of above 8 if you want to try like targeting top 20, 30 schools. And if you have a CPI above 9, you have absolutely nothing to worry for. You can definitely target even the topmost schools. So like the easiest way, like if you were to ask me about what is the easiest way to try and get into a master's program, that would be to try and do some research, because one of the things you have to submit when you're trying to apply for a master's program is a statement of purpose. And what you have to specify in that statement, you have to essentially justify what it is you're trying to do, and you have to show that you have an inclination towards possibly research or some amount of work in that area. Now, the way you can show that you have an inclination in a particular field is by either, say, working a few years in that particular field, or by trying and taking up, say, the equivalent of a research intern. It need not, the best case scenario would be to try and apply for foreign universities. So the best point of time to do that is like during the second year summer, third year summer, or you can even work with, say, some professors at IIT Guwahati who are highly inclined towards research and in that sense. Okay, so yeah, with research, another accompanying thing with research, if the research can lead to papers, that's great. I mean, that's something you can definitely put in your resume, and that's something that can definitely help out. If not, that's perfectly fine. Okay. With regards to branch, so one frequent question that's often asked is regards to branch. Say you're from electronics, wanting to go into computer science, or from computer science or any other branch, and you're not. It's not necessary when trying to apply for masters that you have to be in the branch, that you have to specialize in the branch you did your bachelor's in. Of course, it makes it easier if that was your undergraduate branch. But if you have the necessary, if you can satisfy the necessary course requirements of the master's programs that you're applying, then it's definitely possible. Like you will see a lot of cases where you will see people who did in electronics, in mechanical engineering or other branches, have applied for computer science. So people who did bachelor's in computer science to branches unrelated to computer science. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, that it's not 100% necessary. Um, Apart from that, like I'd say these are the broad requirements per se. I'll like, again, if you want me to go into something in detail, like make sure, like try and ask me once in the Q&A, I can go into detail about any specific part. But I'll just give a brief overline of everything so that we can, in the interest of time. All right, coming to the process. So the first most important part of the process, I would say, not most important, but it's something that one needs to really consider after you've decided that you want to take up a master's, if you do decide to, is to shortlist universities. So you have to understand like what universities match your particular interests. Now, this is something that takes time. You have to, the whole application process, it's recommended to have a 3-4 month head start. People have done within 2 months as well from starting, but that I wouldn't recommend, because you want time to be able to write a recipe. You want time to be able to shortlist universities. So when you look at universities, some of the things you definitely should look at is the course structure. You should look at the rankings for particular universities, and you should see if it's something that particularly interests you, how you want to, and you also need to try and develop some sort of a targeting mechanism for universities. So typically you will target some universities that you would consider ambitious, some that would be moderate, some that would be safe. And what is ambitious, moderate, or safe would vary widely depending on how your profile is, what exactly you've done, and also depending on where you're trying to apply. So like say, for example, machine learning could be something that's very competitive. So even if you have a really good profile, it would be highly recommendable to have some safe or some moderate universities to keep in that sense. And so definitely try and look at the whole picture when it comes to like shortlist universities. Even try and reach out to some students who are working, or sorry, not working, but studying at these universities. Okay, one thing with regards to deadlines. So this sometimes catches some students off guard. So deadlines for most masters computer science applications, they are a little earlier than most other applications. So you'll see deadlines starting from December 1st. Right? In fact, a couple deadlines for, I think, even UCLA or Stanford, those kind of universities are at December 1st itself. So keep that in mind when you try to prepare for applying. So when I say December 1st, essentially it would be the 7th semester. It would directly overlap with when placements would be occurring. So that's just one thing to keep in mind with regards to preparation. That it like the application process for masters can overlap significantly with the placement process. So you have to try and either balance the two, or perhaps take a PPO if you have, or you can even take up both. It's not a compulsion, but that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, now coming to then there is GRE and TOEFL. So GRE and TOEFL are more like aptitude exams. So GRE measures your proficiency towards English and mathematics, and so for that, I would say roughly 1 to 2 months of preparation would be good. You can retake GRE if you mess up, but like it takes time for the results to come and whatnot. So 1 to 2 months preparation would be good. And if you want specific advice, I could give at a later point of time as well. But definitely go over the existing resources with regards to GRE. Like GRE already has a lot of free material out there. Their own ETS books are very good in that matter. And once you've prepared for GRE, you'll notice TOEFL is much easier because it's more of an English proficiency test where you have to pass a certain where you have to have a basic level of comprehension. I wouldn't say basic, but it's much easier than GRE. So again, I'll throw out some scores out that you should target at least for GRE and TOEFL, but then take them with a grain of salt, and always look at the universities you're targeting. You'll always find average scores essentially, wherein you will see the average applicant score. So with regards to GRE, try and make sure you're not at all below 325 typically, and for TOEFL, try and make sure not below say 108, 110. But again, I'd say these are more towards the bare minimum of sorts. The higher, essentially, the better. Internally, GRE and TOEFL, they're treated more as cutoffs of sort, though no university will ever say that of sorts. Wherein if your application is essentially, or if you have above a certain amount, it doesn't really matter. So like getting say something like over 333 or 334 or 330 plus wouldn't really be significant how much greater than 330 or you are in GRE, for example. But if your GRE score or TOEFL score are low, then there's a chance that your application may not be looked at. You could be amazing, your application could be amazing in many fronts, but they may not even have a look at your application. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so I think one of the toughest parts of the whole process is the statement of purpose and the personal statement. So this is something that I recommend you to start. I'd say at least 1 and a half to maybe even 2 months, at least 2 months before the deadlines, wherein the whole process, what you have to do is you have to describe essentially your research interests, inclinations, and you have to mention, like, essentially you have to mention your research experiences, and you have to mention or if it's an industrial experience that's relevant to the area you're applying, and you have to talk about how in some sense you essentially have to show that you're ready for the graduate program. How you choose to do that there are multiple ways. There's no hard and fast rule or one particular rule. The one thing I will say though is, like, this is something that even I felt during the AI process. Like, you can be ready with a draft of your SOP and you can think it's finished, but there's no way close to finished. You will go most probably through multiple drafts. Like, I think my own SOP or person statement went through 5, 6, maybe even 7 major revisions where I had Rohan Bhai and Anup Bhai have a look, and they would recommend rewriting entire paragraphs, deleting entire paragraphs, because it's not something. It's a little different from say a normal English essay, because there are some things that universities are looking for, and you need to make sure that you cover the relevant materials. Also, different universities will have different word limits, so make sure to check out what websites have. The other thing is there's a personal statement that is more inclined towards your personal experiences. It can be presented in the form of say a diversity statement, or that is targeted more towards writing your experience. It's targeted more towards highlighting how essentially what obstacles you would have faced essentially during the whole bachelor's process or undergrad process. And in some sense, it's more like covering. It's there to cover for that essentially. And you can even mention, like, say, if you had an overall good CPI, but say you have something where one semester your CPI dropped down, that's something you should look to even mention. So I think this broadly covers the process. Always, I would strongly recommend always remain in contact with seniors. Keep asking them whether it be regarding shortlisting universities or asking to review regarding SOP person statements, etc. So that's something you should always like be in contact with seniors, and especially seniors who, or even if it's like seniors in IITs in general, who've applied to branches specific to what you're targeting. Um, right. So I think that covers broadly the majority of the things. A couple FAQs I'll just cover regarding financing. So for a lot of MS can be a costly process. The entire whole thing, if you don't have any funding or any R-ship, T-ship, could cost up to 1 crore. That's, I think, the worst case scenario effectively. Or I'd say Rohan Anubhaya could tell better, would be better inclined to discuss about that. So definitely one thing you can try and do is you can always try and make sure um, you apply for scholarships. A lot of universities, UIUC, Wisconsin Madison, a lot of universities will offer scholarships which can more than not only cover for tuition waiver but also give you an effective stipend. Not every university offers this, but make sure to keep your eyes open if financing is something that concerns you. When applying, you can almost always, not almost always, a good number of universities will support financing. And that's something you should definitely try and target. Don't limit your ambitions because you feel like it's not possible. And education loans are always something that is possible. I think that broadly covers the master's process requirements. If you have anything you want to ask me specifically, I think hold it now from now on to the Q&A session. I think over to you, Udbhav. If there's anything else you want me to cover, I think otherwise I'm done.
Okay, so we'll take questions toward like 10-15 minutes after this. Right now, we can have Mriganka. He'll explain the PhD application process for foreign universities. It's a little bit different from MS. So, Mriganka, over to you.
Can you hear me? Hello, am I
Yes,
audible?
you're right. Yeah, yeah.
Fine. Okay. Yeah. So I am Diganka, and I, along with Ronald, recently applied for this group process, and we went through the whole process. He spoke about the masters. Actually specifically applied for the PhD programs, and mine is not in CS; it's in statistics. Uh, okay, so I applied for math and statistics as well. So a lot of applied math departments, some operations research departments, for example, in Princeton and Cornell, and one statistics department in Berkeley. So uh, most or all of what Burnwell said holds true in PhD's case as well, but there are a few differences as well. So one thing I'll add specifically to what he said in the TOEFL case was that a case where I tripped up badly was that in TOEFL you have a speaking part, and it is generally advisable that you take that part more seriously than the rest of the parts. As you said that once you prepare for GRE, you will be well equipped to do the whole of TOEFL, except perhaps the speaking part. And the speaking part specifically has a higher cutoff in some cases. For example, if I remember correctly, Princeton has a cutoff around 26. Some places have around a cutoff of 27 and so, because they assume that you will be taking up TSE duties, and for that you will be needed to speak English fluently and understand it well as well. So that part needs to be taken a bit more care of, since we have, in many cases, for example, in my case, as you can probably tell, I do not have a particularly great accent in speaking, so I had a lower score. That didn't harm me much, since my total went out fine, and in my case, Berkeley didn't actually care much. And but it is generally advisable to keep it fairly high. And in and also in case of PhD, as you said, as Bharnwal said, that this research statement or the statement of purpose, what he said is correct, that you should at least keep 1 to 2 months ahead of time to plan out and write it down. So in case, I mean, in case you need multiple changes, and which you probably will. In my case, I had asked my advisor to help me figure things out in my case. And I also got a few drafts from GitHub and so where people have these drafts of SOPs where which help them get in. So that can help you, but I saw that one question asked whether it is advisable to get a writer to write yours. I think that is highly not advisable. I think you should write your own, and that is because you will be expected, at least in the case of a PhD, to uh, explain why you are interested in something, and also explain like how you plan to study and stuff. So this will differ in the case of between US and Europe. So in US, you generally apply to a department. Uh, and so once you go there, you are expected to do some coursework uh, for the first 2 years, and that is equivalent to a master's. But since it is an integrated program, you also start doing research sometime near the first year or maybe in from the second year in some cases. But in Europe, the program is much more like you apply to a professor. I mean, the official process still goes to a department, but you still apply to a prof. So in this case, uh, so in the case of US, you should mostly be concerned about the research that is done by the department as a whole, and they generally do not mind if you work with multiple people at once. But in Europe, the program is much more compressed, and so you are expected to have a particular research direction before you go there, because it is in general 3 to 4 years, and in US's case, it is like 5 to 6 years, and it is extendable, I guess. I mean, and okay, so now, for example, in my statement, okay, I'll speak about the ones that work. So in the case of, for example, Berkeley, I had started off with things like, I mean, why I got interested in. So my field is probability. So I had started off with things like, so why I got interested in probability and what all stuff I have read. So that I mean, uh, okay, so I'll explain this in some while. So I started off with the things I read, and then what kind of things I like. But perhaps the most difficult part of writing this SOP is uh, like specifying what kind of research you would like to do. And with regards to that, uh, in many cases, people write down the names of professors they are willing to work with. Okay, so this is not final. So you can change this the prof you work with once you go there, but you are expected to show your current directions by mentioning the name of some professors and and what exactly about their research that made you interested. So in this case, it might get a bit technical. So that's why Mayank also said that you should start early on, because in my case, I had to read through several difficult papers and at least make sense of it before writing this thing. Okay, so for example, now why we should read write this on our own is a good question. So like in Berkeley's case, what they had was that they shortlisted. Uh, so what they, according to what they told me, that they had 355 candidates. They had shortlisted around 50, I think, and they plan to take. I mean, plan to offer 4 seats to 22. I didn't think they did 22, but it was slightly less than that. So in after this shortlisting, they took 2 interviews, and this was true both in the CS case. I have a friend whom I know, so she also had 2 interviews in the CS department, and I also had interviews in the statistics department. And these interviews, it is mostly the case that the more technical you get, the better it is. I mean, they will not expect you to speak about technical things, and they explicitly will write that they do not expect you to say or discuss any mathematics. But the professors are generally more inclined to discuss things about this. So in this case, I mean, it should be fairly clear to you what you are speaking about, because I mean, of course, if you are applying to the US, people there, I mean, since you are speaking about the papers they wrote, they will generally know things very well. So I mean, and okay, so that is so this interview process is not. I mean, in many places they do not have an interview. For example, in MIT and Princeton, they didn't have an interview, and in most other places as well, they do not have an interview. But in some places they do, and I think it is generally better